The title of this piece is Boundless Spirit, and it really is because of the red that made it that title, red being of the spirit, but also is technique-wise modular. And I have a graphic design background. I've done graphic design for many, many years. Had an art background prior to that, many years as a designer, and now I teach design. But when I approach a project like this, I'm thinking that maybe it could be a maquette or something larger. And so all the pieces that I do are in that vein. They are maquettes for, and maybe possibly something larger.
My paintings reference my graffiti history a lot, and it may not be very obvious, but there's a whole process that goes into painting that I went through, and that was like very formative for me. It was my introduction to painting and design and learning how to paint and use color. So my studio work references that a lot. It's an extension of that. But as you know, it's a very repetitive, formulaic process to paint graffiti, and it's obviously text-based, and it's focused on a name. And but there's a lot that goes into it that I thought was that I wanted to spend more time investigating. You know, it's a very fast, action-paced thing. It's very instinctual, and I felt like I was, I enjoyed it. I felt like I was making good work, and it was really invigorating for me. So just over time, I kind of explored painting more by removing the letters and removing the name and kind of making it more about the painting.
I've also always been interested in the way that our thoughts about things can be somewhat polarized. That is, and in work like this and that, it's represented through the use of color and line. I'm a big fan of, or always liked studying art history, and so when some of my favorite art is like Baroque art, which you probably might not guess, but there was always this sort of split between the artists that celebrated color and the artists that celebrated line, and I like both. So, but the important thing is that line kind of, in some respects, is about our reasoning capability, or line is kind of reminiscent of logic and order, whereas color was the exact opposite.
So why stamps? I've always done, pretty much from the beginning, reused or repurposed materials. In fact, right now I'm starting a series that's all felt, repurposed industrial felt. The stamps aren't going anywhere though. It's sort of a side project. So I've always done that, and I've always been a mixed media artist, and stamps just worked their way into my pieces because I was always a collage-based artist. And then I started using them more and more and more. And then one day I layered a giant canvas with the stamps with the intention of going in the next morning, and that would be the surface to start painting over. And when I got to my studio in the morning and looked and was about to start painting, I said, it's done. So more and more stamps added, and that was sort of my breakthrough piece when I said, wait, I don't need paint. And then the sort of hoarding and collecting of stamps for 20 years followed after that.
And with these ones, where I wanted to get away from that, I wanted to put more painterly quality into it. So I wanted to get more organic, where I wanted to use the base of basically kind of what I guess I've been known for, is more the bold geometrics, just very rudimentary with everything, as well as color, just line, placement, all of that. And I was kind of feeling very confined. So I kind of wanted to step out of that and go back into, where it's more childlike, where when you think of children, they just get paper and they're just everywhere, they don't care. But if you ask them, well, what are you drawing? They have this story. And it's usually this big, elaborate story, and you're just like, wow, you get that out of that. I don't get it. But I wanted to get it, was the thing. Where I come back, and I think, well, what happened to that with the work of myself, where everything just started to, I felt like I was being drained of energy, where I just kept, putting lines down. I'm like, man, how do I make these perfect? If something wasn't perfect, then I was like, I hate it. I hate everything about it. I need to start it all over again. And I didn't want to do that. So I'm like, I need to be able to accept that and kind of grow from it and go back into just being naive.
mentioned, I mostly work in metal, and when I started doing grad school, I wanted to add another material into the metal because I do love working with industrial materials. So I wanted to add concrete, and thinking about concrete, we know it as something that's really strong. It's able to hold up a building with the pillars, and it's really heavy as well. And I wanted to think, how could I, use that and juxtapose it with making it really thin, and kind of comparing it with the strength and making something look very fragile, but strong at the same time. So I started thinking of stretching it out, and I was really always interested in brutalist architecture, but then I started to think of those ideas of the concrete being heavy and what we use for these brutalist buildings, and I saw myself being drawn to a lot of the buildings that were almost, the architect was doing like a magic trick with gravity of how he's suspending all these beams. So I really was interested with gravity being a part of a lot of these pieces.
Because there's a thing about painting under pressure, and like somebody's talking about, like if you look up close, spray paint is like, it's molecular. It's like, it could have 3 cans, like 3 different colors. But the way you fade it, all the dots, if you go really close, the spatter, especially like in a small, this is small for me compared to what I paint. And in the streets or in the subways, you never really look up close at the work. You're admiring it from afar. When we were young, we were in the space on the roof, really far up and looking up close to somebody's piece. And I always talk about this, but like I'd be like, man, imagine this section as a painting, and just there's these things, and that's kind of what I'm doing with my color work. I rarely do color work anymore. For the last 6 years, I only do 4 pieces a year.
As you can see, a lot of my works, I have geometrical shapes, and my dad is a civil engineer, so I was raised getting to know geometry. I hated it back then. I'm loving it now, obviously. The word that you see on the wall, and it's covered in my spaces, as Sergio was talking about as well, it's the word love in Farsi. And the reason why you see it's different, every single part of it, it's because with calligraphy you can write one single word in 10,000 different ways. I don't call myself a master in calligraphy at any time. It's a complete different art. But the reason why I do this is because I was raised and born in Iran, in Tehran, and we went through 8 years of Iran-Iraq war. And I remember walking in the streets of Tehran. Even to this day, you see a lot of political graffiti on the wall, and it's all written everywhere, and it's down with this, down with that. And to me, power of writing, it's very important. And once you put down a word on any kind of platform or space, it just, you're sending that energy into the world.
So it helps refugee women and pays them to create beautiful bags and purses and all kinds of things from fabric. And so I started just working in production. I was cutting fabric, interfacing, and noticing these interesting shapes that they would then sew together and make these products to sell. And that's kind of where these came from. I noticed that what I was doing there at the store in cutting these fabrics, I was also doing at home. There was this repetition, these shapes that I was laying together, and I noticed this continuity between what I was doing there in my volunteer work and what I was doing in my studio at home. I think in grids, it keeps me sane. If I have a grid, I feel like I can breathe.
There's that sort of mutability of form, and it's obviously something that shows up in a lot of these pieces. Obviously, these are abstract, and that's very representational, but I really consider these to be sort of a bridge between those two worlds. The subject matter happens to be, basically it's paper, these are based on models that I'm working from that are, it's vertical panels, vertical stripes, and I have two pieces that are exactly the same, and I'm basically morphing one of them. So you're seeing that sort of intersection of the very rigid background of these vertical stripes with the intersection of this morphed deviation in front of it. So that's, I mean, it's basically, that's the story behind these, is that it's the bridge of those two worlds of abstraction and representation.
My work deals with ideas of home and migration, and how architecture plays a role in really defining that and defining ideas of home. And that really stems from a personal family history. So both of my parents fled the Baltic countries of Latvia and Lithuania around World War II and lived in displaced person camps for about 10 years before they were allowed to emigrate to the United States. And so that family history has really entrenched me to think about what home means and how we define home. And I mentioned I moved to Chicago about 3 years ago, and that's when I started this body of work. When I came here, I had this large archive from both New York, Pennsylvania, and I was starting an archive in Chicago. And so I looked at these images and thought about my own migration and my own desire to define what home is to me. And then I began combining these images together. So each one of these collages always has a building that's in New York, and in Chicago, and Pennsylvania is the Barns. So it always has that triptych happening in each of these.